Hello there, welcome to Indo Politics. Today we're joined by Minister for Climate, Energy, Environment and Transport and Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin Fingal East, Darragh O'Brien. We'll be discussing fuel costs now that a deal has been reached to end the war in Iran, as well as his plans for the budget and the Fianna Fáil leadership. On the war in Iran, Trump has said the oil can flow. So how long do you expect prices to come down here? How long will that take?
Well, one, welcome the deal. Two, we got to see whether it sticks, obviously. There is a long tail with this crisis, though, because of the damage that's been done to infrastructure. So I think it is really difficult to predict how long it will take to actually see the decreases in oil now feeding through to the pump, because they're refined products then that come in from there. So look, we'll monitor it, and we do that every single day. I get a report every single morning on wholesale oil and gas markets. It is welcome news. We want to see a normalisation there, but it's really difficult to predict, Mary, so I wouldn't even guess on that. But hopefully we'd see, particularly on refined product, like price of gas at the pump, coming through first. There is still a concern, though, on energy prices, because let's say with regard to electricity and gas, that with a lot of our retailers were hedged and are coming out of hedging arrangements now, so they're going to have to go back in. So I would still expect to see retail energy price increases in the short term. But whilst this is welcome news, it's really difficult to predict.
So it sounds like we won't know in time for the July 31st deadline when those excise cuts are due to run out.
Potentially, yeah.
So does that mean that those cuts should be extended then, given the uncertainty?
Well, I think, look, firstly, we brought forward a really significant package, and I think, I was heavily involved, particularly on the RTSS, the Road Transport Support Scheme that's there and that's worked. We've had over 4,000 applications, actually, to that scheme. So, as the Taoiseach said earlier on today, I think he was asked that question too, that we will, as a government, between myself, the Taoiseach and Taoiseach, to assess that at the right time. But like what we've been able to provide on the road haulage side and the coach operators is about 40 million a month for 3 months. I don't have the final amount that's actually subscribed to that in monetary terms. I know that there's been over 4,000 applications. That will help in the short term, but we will assess it.
Do you think for instance, if the decision is to stop the excise at the end of July, right, and that is the same month that, let's face it, a deeply unpopular VAT cut for the hospitality sector is coming in, politically, do you have concerns around how that might look for the government? And if it is not extended, what does that then mean for what you want to do in the budget?
Well, I think we have to operate on the basis of what's best for the country, in not just in the short term, in the medium and long term as well. I'm very conscious we have a budget coming up in October too. The supports were brought in, very targeted on the agricultural contractors, food production, haulage and basically transport operators. And I think they have worked and they're helping, okay? But your point in relation to excise reductions, that's something that we'll, not being evasive, we'll just have to discuss that in the round. I get the point in relation to the hospitality VAT reduction, but that was the decision government made. That was a commitment in the programme for government. But what I'd like to see in the upcoming budget, though, is broader measures that are going to assist people who are working on the tax side to reduce the overall tax burden. And that's something that certainly that we're pushing for in the upcoming budget. But we will assess it. It's very difficult to predict what the retail pricing will be for oil, for gas, for petrol and for diesel. But I think we've been able to respond quite significantly. And we always said that we would retain the flexibility to respond again should we need to do so.
So are you open to extending it if that's what's required? Well,
it'll be a government decision, but if it is what is required at the time, yes, we'd be open. Like, I'm taking nothing off the table. We've had really good engagement, and that phrase is used a lot, but like genuinely, with the haulage and coach sector that I'm responsible for. They've been really constructive. We've been working with them before the protests, and looking at things like the diesel rebate scheme that we also extended to. So there's significant supports there. All of us want, and business want, a normalisation. That's it. And we've got to be aware that the resources we have, we manage on behalf of our citizens. So we've got to deploy them, in a careful way, in a sustainable way too. And we can't be having a budget every couple of months. The budget will be October. I expect a society-wide response there. And like, as I said, my real focus and the Taoiseach's focus on this is to look at our working families. And we're conscious that cost of living across the board has gone up. I think one of the best ways to deploy resources is through the tax system, because those who need it most then will get it, whilst we're continuing to protect vulnerable citizens.
So what about energy credits then in the budget? What's your thinking around whether they should come back or not? Some parties are calling for those to come back.
Yeah, I know they've called for, look, energy credits at the time were the right thing to do, but it was 3.3 billion euro. And the 3.3 billion euro in effectively one-off measures, that's a really significant spend. When I equate that to the nearly 3.5 billion that we've put into Airgrid and ESB by way of equity, that's more, a systemic change. And I'd like to see whatever resources we have put towards systemic change. Now, I'm working through the final piece of the National Energy Affordability Task Force report. We will be ready for that by the end of July to bring that to government. And I'll have a suite of measures within that. Already, you'll see earlier this year, I made changes to the retrofitting grants, and there's been a massive response to them. Why they're important is, that's protecting families into the future. That's reducing their energy bills, reducing their energy consumption. And we've seen a doubling in applications just in the first 4 months, over 50,000 applications for home retrofitting, because I've made them more accessible so you can break them down. So they're the type of things that I think are permanent changes that protect people against the volatility of the fuel markets at the moment. But look, I'm not discounting anything, because we haven't had those budgetary discussions yet. They're beginning to happen now. They're happening earlier. And we do have to look at things in the round about how we can deploy cost of living measures through taxation, which some people would argue, with I think a large degree of justification, is a better way to do it. The energy credits were universal. So someone on 500,000, if they were lucky enough to be earning 500,000, will get the same as someone on 50,000, on 40,000. So I think if we can use our resources through the tax system to reduce the burden for people, whilst bringing forward measures like we have on retrofitting and looking at options around systemic change to energy pricing. Now, we are exposed as a country because we import 80% of our gas. We're an island nation, we have a dispersed grid. That's why we need to accelerate and continue to accelerate renewables that will bring us down in price in the medium term. But it's in the meantime, I know we've got to do our best to look after people.
Systemic change sounds great, but it sounds like it's something for the longer term.
Yeah, it's difficult.
And it doesn't mean much to a household, perhaps with 2 adults, 2 children, who are paying way above the European average for their electricity costs. How can you explain to those people, to almost all families in the country, why they're paying so much more?
Yeah, well, we're paying so much more because we're an island nation. We're at the end of a grid set. We've only 2 interconnectors to Britain. We're building another interconnector to France at the moment. We're still too dependent on fossil. Where that change gets us to on pricing is accelerating renewables. And that's what I'm absolutely committed to doing. And that's, in fairness, what we are doing. We've seen the first 4 months of this year, about 50% of our electricity generated through renewables. And we have a really good pipeline to accelerate that further. I get the point, though. The people are saying, OK, that's great and that's good and that secures our energy future, which we need to. But what about my bills now? And there are options that we're looking at within it that will come forward in the Affordability Task Force report that I chair that group myself to see what we can do in the medium term while that's happening. For example, if I look at solar and household solar, we've had over 100,000 homes in the country now have solar. You're reducing your energy bills by up to €1,500 per annum on a permanent basis. And that's why I broke those grants up and make them easier to get. So I'm not going to increase those grants this year, but I'm potentially looking at other grants that we can add on to that will help on affordability.
In the meantime, network charges account for 40% of a household bill. Should the state be picking up some of that slack?
Well, we have already, and we have already through the equity that we've put into ESB and that we're putting into Airgrid. So that reduces their borrowing requirements. And really what we're looking at is a grid that needs significant upgrading. And we're not alone in that in Europe, by the way. There's every energy minister I meet, there's issues with their grid. That's why we're going to invest about just over 18 billion between now and 2030 in our grid. That does add to cost, and we've got to make sure that cost is apportioned across the board.
But is it right that families and businesses have to pick up most of the cost of that.
Yeah, well, that's the framework that's there at the moment. The other way that it will be done is through direct exchequer funding. So I think if one was to look at, let's say, that 18 billion we're going to invest between now and 2030, that you're looking at on or about 3 billion, 3.5 billion a year that we would have to be actually competing with other departments like health, like education and others to actually get that funding. I get the point though, if we can deliver the projects that we need to, and I use one example, which is the North-South Interconnector, which has been going on for far too long, which will bring about affordability straight away through the delivery of that project, resilience in our grid as well. They're the things that need to be done to bring about long-term affordability. And that's why I'm managing those projects on a project management basis with EirGrid and ESB Networks, because we need to get on with building these things. We need to get on with more storage. We need to get on with building out our grid. And in parts of our country, our grid is under pressure, and that does have an effect on cost. But I'm aware, though, and I just want to be clear with people, of the pressures that many families and small businesses are under. That's why I think the grants in the short term are really important. Like we did 5,000 business grants last year. It makes a difference to businesses, permanent savings for them. So we need to see how we can actually deploy more of them.
Another reason bills are so high is data centres, according to a recent Friends of the Earth report. And Peadar Tabín of Aintu says a pensioner living alone pays twice as much per unit as a data centre. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
No, well, it's not actually. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it. We're not seeing the ICT sector. So if you look at data centres and above and beyond that, about 180,000 people working in the economy in that. A lot of the large firms, ICT firms, want to hold their data in Ireland, and we've had significant investment in that. I don't believe we should pull the shutters down. I do believe it needs to be managed on a planned approach, and that's why I brought forward with Peter Burke the Large Energy User Action Plan, which means new data centres or new large energy has to come about in the connection with 80% of their energy delivered through new renewable sources. I think one thing that's lost in the discussion, if I may, is that Ireland does not have a large industrial base. We're not a heavy manufacturing country. So our heavy manufacturing is in cutting edge technologies and ICT. So if I go to Germany or if I go to France, if I look at what the car industries there are using as a percentage of energy or military equipment or other heavy industrials, other countries have large portions of their energy being used through their industrial base. Our industrial base, I think, is far more sophisticated, and it's sophisticated in the ICT side, which is supported by data centres. And I don't think, as a country, it would serve us well if we were to pull the shutters down there and turn away investment. And recently, by the way, over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been very few new data centres have come in and invested in Ireland. And I think that's something we need to look at very clearly. That's why we brought forward the Large Energy Action Plan. We need to remain at the cutting edge of technologies, and we need to remain competitive. It does, yes, it leads to challenges, certainly, that how we can manage that.
Tension's always going to be there, though, isn't there, in terms of the energy usage of data centres? I mean, it's not going to go away.
I think right now about 22% of our energy is used by data centres. There's headroom to 30% by the end of the decade, those that have already connection agreements. But that's managed by way of the grid investment programme that still allows us to deliver the 300,000 homes that we need between now and the end of the decade, that still allows further economic expansion. And that's in PR6, which is the capital plan. So, I hear this in the Dáil a lot, and I answer questions on it, and I respect people's different other points of view. But there hasn't been one housing estate not connected because of a data centre. This is thrown out there that, it's data centres ahead of house. It's not. We've been able to manage the growth in our economy and our people. We've 1.5 million extra people in the country now than we had in 1990. Thankfully, our economy has continued to grow through that. Not without its challenges, by the way. And I'm not suggesting everything is perfect by any way, shape or form. But we've done that. We've been able to double our renewables capacity just in a 10-year period. Like I mentioned, wind doubling in 10 years. Solar has increased by 1,000% in a 10-year period and is a really important mix now in our energy grid and in our energy generation. And we have a really strong pipeline. Like the end of this year, we'll hit 3 gigawatts of solar. Now, what does 3 gigs mean? 1 gig powers about 500,000 homes. So that's 1.5, the equivalent of powering 1.5 million homes in solar alone. 10 years ago, we had 2 megawatts. So so we're going in the right direction. We need to accelerate that. That's why things like the Planning Act I brought in the last government, which was opposed by many in the opposition, to speed up delivery, and then the critical infrastructure bill that Jack is working on too, will enable us to deliver projects quicker. Because I mentioned North-South earlier on, and North-South Interconnector is critical for the whole island. And it's just been delayed and delayed and delayed.
Just
and
on
we need to get on with it.
Just on the National Energy Affordability Task Force, right? There was criticism late last year and early this year that it hadn't met enough times. It was set up last April by yourself and you took over this brief, and it's been kind of put forward as this solution, right? It only met a few times, and then the fuel protests happened. Was that a wake-up call to you?
No, I don't think so. Look, it is met. I couldn't tell you exactly, but I've chaired 5 or 6 of those meetings already, and a lot of, we have...
The opposition would say not as much has come out.
Yeah, I know, and look, I get that, but if you look at the last budget, I get what they're saying, but they're not correct, I should say, because we had an interim report out before the last budget that was able to recommend things like the 9% VAT rate for gas and electricity, to extend that out to 2030. That was able to recommend the extension of the fuel allowance payment to the working family, to working families, those on working family supplements. Sorry. So what does that mean? It basically means you have about 470,000 households that are receiving direct support from the state to their energy bills. That's a quarter of the households in the country. Okay, the 9% reduction is about worth 120 quid or euro right the way through to now to 2030. And we're looking at other things that we can do. By the way, the NEAT will not be a panacea to all our ills on energy. It won't be. Where we have got to get to is that reaching that tipping point on renewable generation, where, we're, as I said earlier on this year, about 50% in the first 4 months. We're averaging on an annual basis just over 40. We need to get that up to 60, 70, 80% by the end of the decade. We do that, that's a game changer for us. And that's in the near term. But it does require that where large energy projects are coming forward, that there's an understanding in the country as to why we're doing it. It's renewables or it's continued reliance on imported oil and gas from third countries that we cannot control the price of. That's the choice.
You brought the Dublin Airport passenger cap legislation today, and we're talking about Metrolink, and we'll head towards the budget. Obviously, that's a big play you've made as commitment to the programme for government. Freeing it up and expanding the airport's been a priority for some time, but obviously, similar to Metrolink, so is easing congestion, right? And it's my understanding that you have a document effectively sitting on your desk that gives a series of recommendations around how to ease congestion, because it drives people up the walls, right? And one of those has been extended Lewis timetables, and this is something, and Mary could probably touch a little bit on this in the budget as well, is that decarbonisation effort, as well as public transport, as well as electric vehicles. So what, you said you're not ruling anything out, what are you ruling in terms of easing congestion?
Well, I haven't got the report yet. Again, I've attended those meetings too, and I'll have the report very shortly. And what I've asked state agencies and operators is to look at some short-term measures we can do to ease congestion, particularly in congestion pinpoints. One example is M4, the bus corridor that's been there that buses couldn't use. Okay, we've sorted that now. We changed the regulations. It shouldn't have been. I don't know why that was the case, if I'm being very honest with you. That's just one, but there's a series of other measures. I haven't got the final report. That will be coming to me. I convened that group. Congestion, look, and to be frank, that we want more people using public transport, and we're seeing that happening year on year. Last year, about 365 million public passenger journeys, right, which is great. That'll increase further this year. That means we've got to provide more public transport, and we'll do that. That is really, how we're going to help decongest. We're seeing, in relation to decarbonisation, more people buying EVs. I'll turn to that in a minute, which is good as well. But I've got to look at short-term measures. Are there pinch points? We're starting with the GDA. Within the GDA, that we can do certain things that are going to alleviate somewhat. It's not going to fix it. And actually, as we start building a number of the projects that I've just discussed with you, in some areas, that's going to be a real imposition for people, and will, in the short term, make congestion more, really difficult for people. I think most people will see the benefit of these projects in the medium term, but we're not going to be able to do these without causing an inconvenience to some.
You're bringing in a scrappage scheme for to enable people to buy electric cars. When will people who don't have off-street parking, who live in a terraced house, be able to put out a charger at the front of their house?
Really soon.
When?
Next
How?
few months.
Okay.
Next few months. And this is, look, I live in a multi-unit development, okay? We have driveways, but I have neighbours of mine who don't, and I have a lot of, I see the problem that's there, right? So firstly, if I'll go back a little step, EVs are taking over as the number one car of choice that people are buying, and that is really, really good. And that's why I brought the scrappage scheme in as well, to look at the older cars, the 13-year-old cars, and have a sort of a weighting towards rural areas. And we'll see how that works. I've provided funding for about 2,000 cars there. Anecdotally, the evidence so far has been, really positive. Now, it doesn't open until the 1st of July. We'll see. I'll assess it, and then we'll move it on from there after. Hopefully that is fully subscribed. I expect, what dealers are telling me, it'll be oversubscribed. So we're really accelerating on the EV side. Why is that? Like, it's really good from a climate perspective, decarbonisation. Good for household pockets, though, as well. If you were rightly talking about energy cost to people, if you look at the cost of running a car, an EV can save you about €1,500 a year in the cost of running your car between fuel and if you compare, let's say, the VRT rates and tax rates and that various different things. So it makes a lot of sense for people. So I want to continue to support that. That's why I put an extra 40 million in this year, because we're seeing such an uptake. I wanted to make sure that the grants are covered. And I was able to take that money from the Climate Action Fund in the Department of Climate, Energy, Environment over to the Department of Transport. So that makes sense that we wasn't actually looking for additional exchequer funds. We were able to manage it within our own budgets between the two departments. So, look, I think getting back to your question, that on-street charging, because lots of people want to charge at home, most do. We've improved the public charging network, and that'll improve further this year. But a lot of people, particularly if you're living in terraced houses and you've shared driveways, have a problem. That'll be coming in very soon, in the next few months. This year, definitely. Okay. And what I'm waiting for is some guidelines that we got to sign off on, and that those guidelines then will be given to local authorities to say, here's how you do it. I've looked at what's been done in Britain, the channeling and that, and it works pretty well. And I think that'll be a game changer for a lot of people. It is a frustration. I get that, and I've seen cases where local authorities have maybe gone after new developments where they've been providing, on-street charging, and that'll be addressed this year.
In relation to the airport cap, you promised that Dublin Airport will be a good neighbour.
Has to be. To
people in the area. How, if there are more flights coming in and out?
I live beside the airport myself. Okay, I've grown up beside it. I think, like most of the people I represent, recognise what an important employer it is. We've tens of thousands of jobs supported by the airport, about 130,000 between direct and indirect, and it's really important for our connectivity as an island nation, and it's a very well-connected airport. There have been issues in the past and now with how DAA operates and has operated, particularly with communities on the west of the airport, but not exclusively. Places like Portmarnock, places like St. Margaret's, and I want the noise insulation scheme expanded. I want an improvement to the voluntary purchase scheme. And actually the decision that the Noise Authority have put out now, that's out on display, and I say to people, do engage with that, is their draft decision. Very much looks at those very things. There are some households that are basically right on the new runway. That is going to be very difficult for people. When I say new runway, the second parallel runway, very difficult for some people to basically live there. And DAA should be purchasing those houses. They have purchased some, and there's a 30% premium above market value. I think that needs to be looked at. And also I think the issue with purchasing land, not just the house. And then also ensuring where flight paths are designated, that flight paths, are adhered to. Like, I've always supported the airport. I supported the development of the airport, going way back when I was in the council in 2004. 3 years I was there with a development plan, because it makes it's an economic sense for our country. It underpins tens of thousands of important jobs. And it's a good airport, but can it do things better? Yes, it can, and it needs to, and it must. And as shareholder, I've engaged directly with the airport on those things. And most people, to be fair, living out in the North Dublin area, fully get that the airport's there, okay, and that it was there preceded most of the people who've lived there. And there will be, in some areas, more noise. Thankfully, planes are getting quieter as technology improves as well, and they're more fuel efficient too. But we need to expand the noise insulation scheme for people who are directly affected and improve the voluntary purchase scheme.
Just a brief policy question. It's not in your brief, but migration is a huge topic and policy area for the government. There's a lot of changes happening with the EU Migration Pact, but one that has sort of gone under the radar is that Jim O'Callaghan is talking about return hubs to send men, women and children to a third country when they can't be deported back to their own country. Do you support this, or will you support this as a minister? Some people believe it's going too far, that the human rights of people who are sent to those areas cannot be guaranteed.
Well, firstly, the EU Migration Pact is EU-wide, okay? So this isn't just an Irish initiative, and it's important that we're with the EU partners. Like, we're much better being within the European Union, having a uniform asylum system rather than being on our own. And I'd say to people who are arguing against it, look what happened in Britain. When Britain stepped outside of EU frameworks and any agreements with third countries, they're now effectively paying France to patrol beaches in France. Okay, now, fundamentally, though, I think Irish people are good people. The country has been a welcoming country, and I support that. I support a fair and firm asylum system. Like, we've, tens of thousands of people have come here, even over the last 5-10 years, have come here, set down their roots, are working away, brought their families here, are contributing greatly to our economy, but most importantly, contributing greatly to our society. I represent one of the most diverse constituencies, if not the most diverse, in the country. And that diversity has been really good for our country. And I'd stand over that 100 times out of 100. Where there are issues with people using an asylum system to gain access, though, there has to be consequences to that. Like, if someone applies for asylum and they're valid, what I want to see is their asylum claim. This is what Jim O'Callaghan wants to see, which is happening, that their claim is heard much sooner and they're processed much sooner, and then they have a right to stay much sooner. Then if you're refused, that you have an appeal held much sooner. Like, I felt bad for people who've been here 5, 6, 7, 8 years, left in limbo without any decisions being taken. That's not the way we should approach it.
Return hubs are a matter for member states.
Yeah,
and it looks like Ireland will choose to use this return hub system, which is quite controversial.
Well, I'm not sure whether it is or not. I think, look, and I know this can be very emotive as well, but there are many legal avenues to get into Ireland. And I think we have a very fair immigration system. I think where people are fleeing conflict, and we've proven that, not just with the people that we've been able to welcome in from Ukraine, but from many other conflict zones as well who've come in here. I want us to still do that, and we will do that. But we need a fair system too, and we need to manage it. And it's good that we can have, open discussions with regard to immigration and asylum. I absolutely abhor any racism of any kind, and those who are using this migration pact as and basically lying to people to say it's a diminution of Irish sovereignty. It's not true at all. It isn't true. And I think we'd have to ask, opposition parties as well, or those who've opposed this, that it's an EU-wide measure that actually, from a humanitarian perspective, is much better for those who are seeking asylum, because it'll provide a much more efficient asylum system. It's fairer to the people. It's fairer to their families. And I say, look, I have many, many friends and constituents from all over the world that love Ireland and that have come here and chosen Ireland as a place to live. There are many legal avenues, and for those who are fleeing conflict, Ireland should be open to asylum, and is, but we've got to make sure people are treated fairly. But where a claim is denied and post-appeal, people have to leave.
I have just one final question, that's all right, Minister. Speaking of Jim O'Callaghan, he's seen as your main rival for the future leadership of Fianna Fáil. Darragh Cleary, your own colleague, would have said recently that loads of people are asking would he go for it. Jim O'Callaghan said he would a certain future date. Now, you have said you want to see Micheál Martin lead Fianna Fáil into the next general election. However, there was a fairly, I would describe it as a drubbing at the Dublin Central by-election recently. And in the last few days... No, it wasn't. No. We've had Fine Gael come out and try and claim the Northern Ireland space, right? I just want
see where you're going with all this now. This is...
Well, I just wanted your reaction to where you think the party needs to go. It needs to reclaim ground.
No, well, I think, look, first and foremost, we're only just after 18 months after the last general election. And I fully get, political speculation and, all of that, and political discourse around what will happen next. We've a job to do. We're elected to do it. And we were returned at the last general election as the largest party in the Dáil, and we're the lead party in government. And we've got to get on and deliver the programme for government that we said we would do. And that's what drives me fundamentally. And it's great to be able to do that across the two departments that I have. In relation to Fianna Fáil itself, I'd touch on the by-elections too. Like, Dublin Central was not a surprise. We weren't going to win Dublin Central. I was actually, in the election in Dublin in 2011 when we returned with one TD. Like we now have 10 TDs in Dublin. We have an MEP in Dublin as well. We're able to work constituencies to work our way back, and we have a specific job to do in Dublin Central. What I found
still the lowest ever result.
Oh yeah, hey, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And I went out to the RDS. I was there. No, absolutely, but there were reasons for that. I think there was, and no disrespect to the team who were there on the ground, there was a lack of connection on the ground. Like I canvassed out there. It was decent, but the relevance of Fianna Fáil, particularly in Dublin Central, wasn't there.
But is the party losing that connection with its grassroots, with the ordinary people?
I don't think so. I think there's
It was one of the things identified after the Jim Gavin debacle, wasn't it, that the grassroots felt left out of the process?
Well, I think you've picked two of our recent finest moments, Nat. Okay. So, but if I could go back just a little bit before that, where we had a general election, where I don't think there could be any doubt that we have well connected and continue to connect well with the voters, either those who support us or those who give us preferences. Just before that, we had a local election where we returned as the largest party in local government. So I'm just putting it in context. Like I was here in 2011 when people wrote off the party and said Micheál Martin would be the first Fianna Fáil leader who would never be Taoiseach. He's returned now for the second time to be Taoiseach. Now, I'm not being complacent about this. All parties, and I just care about mine, have to continue to work to ensure that we're representing our people, that we're being radical in our policy approach as well, and that we enunciate what we're about, okay? So that's something we do. And yeah, look, certainly from the presidential election, which was a debacle, and nothing against Jim Gavin at all. He's a decent man. I felt really bad for him, I have to say. And I'm glad that he's back doing his thing. I particularly felt bad for him and his family. But we've a responsibility to look at that and to make sure that things like that don't happen again. Dublin Central was always going to be tough, okay? I know that. And there are only 3 constituencies in the country where we don't have TDs. And they're constituencies that we are focusing on. But there's a particular piece of work needs to be done in Central. And I see it I see in all parties a big variance constituency by constituency of support levels in parties. Look at the last general election or even the locals. You'll see one constituency, 24.5% support for the party. Adjacent constituency, 14%. And then you'll see it grow in another one. And that's not unique to Fianna Fáil, by the way. So I think, look, we've got to roll up our sleeves again and continue to work to deliver what we said we would do. We're a pro-enterprise party. We want to give people a hand up, not a hand out. We've been very clear, I think, responsible in government. We are a constitutional Republican party. I've always been proud of our Republican heritage. That's one of the reasons I got into politics. I abhorred violence, and that was never going to advance our policy with regard to unification. I remember the Downing Street Declaration. I'm old enough. That's one of the reasons I got into it. I remember the Good Friday Agreement. I remember where we've advanced in real terms unifying people. That's not just a statement saying that we're going to think it. Like I look at Shared Island. Look at what the Taoiseach's initiative on Shared Island has been real. And what really sort of pleases me is I see how normal the work is and effective the work is on the North-South Ministerial Council. And I'm across environment, energy and transport. And I work really well with colleagues in North, but it's normal now. And it doesn't mean if someone's not SDLP aren't in the executive, obviously, be they Sinn Féin, be they DUP, be they Alliance or UUP. There's really good working relations and we're working on specific projects and very much project-based like the new enterprise fleet and the upgrade of the Northern Line. That's down to the work that Micheál has done and that we have done in government with regard to Shared Island. So it is about unifying our people. I want a united Ireland. I've been very clear on that, but I want a united Ireland that doesn't be a united Ireland that is actually discriminating against a smaller minority. We got to respect those who have an allegiance to Britain, and I think we do. I think Fianna Fáil has shown how we can do that, and that's something that we feel very, very strongly about as a party.
What about Fine Gael's blueprint?
For
United Ireland.
I'll wait to see it. Hey, look, fair play. Look, that's good. I think.
Your clothes.
No, I don't think so at all. I think people who know our track record with regard to constitutional republicanism, I think if you compare our track record, I think it's there for people to see. What I would say is, look, that's good. And the Fine Gael as a party are entitled to bring whatever they like. They're good partners in government. I work well with them. We work well together. I have good colleagues that are there and good colleagues in the independent side. I think really what our people want to see us do now, though, is we've discussed earlier on today, like cost of living, energy, public transport, the projects that we need to deliver, to not to be complacent about our economy and about future growth. We can't be. Like, we're a very open country and open economy. These things, you know, the surpluses that we generate don't just happen by chance. They happen because of the hard work of our people and good economic policy.
Finally, one last go, the leadership question. Derek Leary said people have been asking him about it. Lots of people. Jim McCallum said his own mother is the only one who's asking about it. Are people asking you about it? Are people talking to you about this? Is it a conversation you've been having with constituents? Is it something that's coming up more?
There's no vacancy. And I think our job as cabinet ministers and as TDs for our areas is to get on with the work that we're elected to do. And that's all I'm focused on doing.
Thanks, Minister, for coming in to talk to us. You can get more from Indo Politics on the Irish Independent YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts.